Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm Danny Rubin. Thrilled to have you all here today for our next installment of our virtual internship series. Today, we're learning all about the world of law enforcement. We have a fantastic guest lined up. Very grateful for his time, Lieutenant Scott Myers. And we will get into that conversation in just a few minutes. I'll ask Lieutenant Myers, and also I want to introduce Mac Dowd from the Rubin team, our implementation and training specialist. She'll be helping out in the chat today. And we also have Miss Rhonda Cunningham, who is our sign language interpreter. I would ask Lieutenant Myers and Mac, if you'd like to just click off your camera for just a moment. I'll do a little bit of introduction and then we'll bring him in for our conversation. Okay, perfect. All right, well, again, thank you all for being here. I'm Danny Rubin. I am the founder of Rubin. We are a provider of online curriculum for business communication skills. Teachers, show of hands, how many of your students write emails that look like text messages? Teachers, they're the hands. So what we do, among other skills and topics, is teach students how to communicate effectively over email, over the phone, through Zooms, through Google Meets, Microsoft Teams, or in person, hopefully again one day. Whenever we're talking to people, how do we conduct ourselves? How do we open doors for opportunity by using our words effectively? That's who we are as a company. And to get us started, as I always like to do, and those of you who have been here before, you know we always like to give out some free resources to teachers. So the first thing I'd like to do is queue up a page. Pull up my chat again. Can everyone see my screen okay? It says free worksheets and presentations. Can I get a yes in the chat? Okay, thank you. So for the teachers, if you're looking for some exercises to help us finish out the year or even prep for the fall, we've put together a Google folder of worksheets and presentations. If you don't have this yet, please request it from us. I'll tell you how in just a second. We cover topics like identifying the parts of an email, why you need to capitalize I. Teachers, raise your hand. Do students not capitalize I in their messages? Yes. Closing lines, professional looking text messages, how to sign your name in cursive. Raise your hand. Should students know how to sign their own name before they graduate? These are the skills we teach, among others. Okay, worksheets and presentations for all of these topics. In addition, we put together a checklist for effective online presentations. Preparing for the presentation, how to deliver the presentation, lots of good tips to remember right before you go live, as they say. So we put everything together in a Google folder, okay? And for the teachers, if you're interested in any of this material, here's all you have to do. Please go to the chat and type the word interested with your email address. What we like to do, because we can't meet you face to face, what we'd like to is we'd love to have a quick phone call in the coming days to say hello, pass along the material so that you can make the most of it in your classroom. Okay, so just interested in your email for the teachers, and we'll be happy to send that along. Okay, thanks to those who have put their information. You're welcome to continue to do so. We'll mention it again at the end so that teachers have a chance to grab this in case they missed it at the beginning. Okay, so interested in your email, and we will pass it along in the next day or so. Okay, so also a quick mention for those who will eventually watch this through a recording, because many teachers watch this in a recording. If you'd like the resources I mentioned, but you weren't here live, please go to support@rubineducation.com with the subject line Rubin Worksheets, and we will pass it along that way. Okay, so for those who are going to check this later, that's for you. A couple of last little mentions that we have another webinar coming your way in 2 weeks. We do these every 2 weeks for the school year. On Wednesday, May 5th at 1:30 again, we're going to cover the world of real estate. We have a real estate agent and a mortgage lender, learning both sides of the home buying process. Anybody here, show of hands, interested in this topic, teachers or students? Anybody want to come to this one around real estate? So that's on the 5th. You'll see info about that in the coming days too, but I want to put it on your radar now. Get it on your calendar, May 5th. Okay. Now, also for everybody here today, we're going to pass along a certificate for being here at our session. Okay, so look out for that tomorrow morning. We will also send the recording out in the morning of the webinar. Okay, so it's all coming your way in the next day or so. So look, keep an eye on your email for all of that. One last thing I want to share, and then we will bring in our special guest. Okay, right up here. I do want to explain for those who are new to our company who we are beyond our webinars. Again, we're called Rubin, and we have a curriculum, an online curriculum called Emerge. And Emerge provides a library of ready-made topics where students can learn either through class instruction or self-directed. They can learn how to communicate better. We cover a variety of topics: email writing, how to write emails properly, life skills for communication, phone etiquette, video etiquette skills. We cover networking scenarios, resumes, cover letters, internship and job outreach, email prep, LinkedIn profile creation, job interview skills. We also cover entrepreneurial communication, coming up with ideas for new businesses, sales writing, website page writing, including writing your own e-portfolio. Tell us in the chat, students, if you're working on your own e-portfolio this year. Public relations skills, fundraising communication. And lastly, we cover leadership development communication, writing as a manager, writing to a customer or client appropriately in an email, project management communication, public speaking skills, writing reports and summaries as if you're writing to your boss or customer, and exercises for student leaders. A big library that integrates to LMS like Canvas, Schoology, Moodle, Blackboard. How many teachers here use an LMS? Google Classroom, Canvas. Shout it out in the chat. Tell us what LMS are you on? So we integrate to different platforms to teach students how to communicate. Jenny says Canvas, Canva, to Google Classroom. So that's who we are as a company. That's what we provide. Okay. I'd love to bring Lieutenant Scott Myers back. Hopefully he didn't get called out on assignment, as they say. And there he is, still here. All right. Well, again, we're very grateful for his time today. And what I'd first like him to do is introduce himself and his background and what he does in his job today. And then I have a question for him, but let's have him introduce himself first. Go right ahead.
Well, Danny, thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here and talk to over 120 people, which is incredible. So again, my name is Scott Myers. I'm a lieutenant at the Coral Springs Police Department. I've been a police officer for about 25 years, and I'm currently a lieutenant, which means I supervise about 30 different people, give or take, on the midnight shift. So I have 3 sergeants, and they each supervise about 7 patrolmen. And then we have canine working, and we have some other ancillary officers, detectives that are working, and they all report to me when I'm working the midnight shift. So that's kind of what I do right now. My background is quite more extensive. First of all, I'm a father. I have 2 teenagers. They're both in high school. So I can relate to all the teachers and all of the kids, probably not, but I'll try. I also went to the University of Florida. I did my undergraduate there and graduate degree there, which is probably not a traditional track for being a police officer. But while I was at the university, I was studying business, and I thought I wanted to get into information technology or computers. And I did that for a year, and I hated it. And I said, I'd rather do something that I really enjoy doing for less money and hopefully be happy. And probably the best decision I ever made was to get it back into law enforcement. And I've had a great career. I've done everything from being a patrolman to being a field training officer, who are the officers that train the new officers, maybe the hardest job in the department. I was a detective. I was then a homicide detective. I did that for 3.5 years. Also on the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force. That consisted of really just going out and hunting the worst of the worst criminals. I did that. My entire career up until a few months ago, I was on SWAT. So I was on SWAT for just over 20 years. I was a sniper for the last 5. And after being a detective, I got promoted, and then I went back to the road, and I've been bouncing around ever since.
Wow. Students, first of all, we always practice our listening skills in here. So he said he worked, what kind of shift does he work or does he supervise? There was a word before shift. There we go. Olivia got it. Midnight shift. I want to make sure we heard that. Show of hands, students, how many people think all the different roles that Lieutenant Myers has had is pretty cool over the 25 years? I mean, he's really done so much. So many of the jobs that you had listed. And by the way, I want to ask that question again to the students who missed it. Students here who are interested in law enforcement, put the job you're interested in the chat so we can see the different types of work you're interested in, because he's done so many of them already. So one person says SWAT. So there you go. So thank you for sharing your background. I have a question prepared for you. And for students and teachers who have been here before, what is the first question I always ask? What do I show the guests that I have done prior to the interview? Beth Luter said it right there. Research. Thank you very much. I always show I've done my research because it's so important to show people we care about them before we expect them to care about us, right? Like at a job interview or an internship interview. So the first thing I did is I went online and I was looking around at Lieutenant Myers and I Googled his name and oh, look what came up. Look what we have here. This only took a few seconds. 7 News Miami. Coral Springs police officer donates plasma after recovering from COVID-19. And guess who it is? It's our special guest today. So he donated plasma to help people through COVID. So my question is to Lieutenant Myers, why did you do that? Why did you feel compelled to donate plasma after recovering from COVID?
Well, I caught COVID very early on in mid-March. And back then, if people remember, it was a very, very scary disease and people didn't know how to treat it and how it was going to hurt people. But what they learned pretty quickly was that you could take the plasma and turn it into basically a medicine to help people that were in really grave near death's bed, and give them that plasma and it would help them recover. So I decided as soon as I recovered and I could safely donate the plasma that I would, and I could help 4 people with each donation I made. I ultimately donated 3 times. And so hopefully I was able to help 12 people.
That's wonderful. Wonderful. And so students, we all observed what I did, right? I looked him up on Google, found a link, read it, prepared a question from it. Show of hands, students, how many of you could do what I just did for the next time you have your own interview or opportunity? Could you Google the person you're going to talk to? Look them up? Where might you look on the internet to learn about somebody else? Where would you go to learn about someone's background? Give me a website you might check. Google. There's a couple other good ones too. I want us to really understand what I'm doing here is I'm showing you how to make a great impression. Lieutenant Myers, if you are looking to hire somebody new and they came in and knew a little bit about you or your department, what would that say to you if someone had already done a little bit of homework?
Well, first of all, it would be very impressive and very unique. In fact, this morning at 9 a.m. And 10 a.m., I interviewed 2 prospective candidates for the police department. So we had these interview questions set up, and one of the basic questions is, what have you done to prepare? And when they look at you blindly and they don't have a good answer, they're not going to get scored as highly as somebody that's done their research. And it's not hard to do the research. You can find out crime stats about the community, how big the community is, how big the police department is, what different areas of the department do you have. Not all police departments have SWAT teams. Not all police departments maybe have a Marine unit or a helicopter. So if you do your research and they ask you in the interview, because clearly they're going to say, what have you done to prepare? And you can say, well, I've done this research and I realized that you've got a 200-man department and a SWAT team, and I've always wanted to do SWAT. And you can then transition that to, well, I was a physical ed, major, or I know martial arts, and you can then start talking about yourself. So I think the research is key. And I would say probably only about 20% of the people that we interview have done a thorough, good, even a mediocre job of researching.
Wow. I think that's the students. Show of hands. Did you hear what he just said? That if you want a job in law enforcement, you should come in there with some knowledge about the department, the city, the information about that community. That would go a very long way in his eyes. And he's one of the people who's hiring. So take it from him, right? So I hope that we all understand, and I say it at every webinar, this is so important that we learn how to look people up ahead of time. So thank you for that. I also want to, some of you have already started doing this and I appreciate it. Please start putting any questions that you have in the Q&A area in Zoom, okay? So I'll be going through and picking out questions, and we'll pull them from there. So please start putting all of your questions in there. I want to start with well, you sort of addressed it a little. Maybe you could take it a little bit further. A question from Austin Marzette. And Austin, let us know what school you attend in the chat if you don't mind. He said, what would be the advice to give if you were going to apply for a job? Now, you just said do your homework, but what else could people be doing to prepare before they seek jobs in law enforcement? What else should they be thinking about?
Well, trying to figure out where in law enforcement you fit is probably the first thing that you want to tackle. I've seen a lot of great answers as to that here. So maybe they want to be a dispatcher. Maybe they want to be a police officer. Maybe they want to get into the crime scene forensics. So if once you figure out the direction you want to go, I would suggest reaching out to the department, your local department, and trying to talk to somebody in that specific unit. So for instance, if you want to be a dispatcher, you would call the Coral Springs Police Department up and ask to speak with the dispatch supervisor. And, they might not talk to you that day, but they'll call you back or they'll email you. And you can maybe make an appointment to come in and get a tour. Maybe you can sit down for a few hours up in the dispatch center and see what dispatchers actually do. Because I think the big myth is what we do, whether it be dispatch or police or crime scene, it has nothing to do with TV. It has nothing to do with the movies. That is 1% of what we do. And if you don't really know what you're getting into, it could be a very costly, time-consuming waste of everybody's time. So I would suggest reaching out to your local department and seeing if you can meet with somebody. I think doing a ride-along with the department is a great way of seeing what's going on. With COVID, it's been very challenging, but now we're starting to loosen our guidelines, and you could easily, maybe not today, but in a month or two, do a ride along. So those are, things that I would suggest. Anybody that's remotely interested in getting into law enforcement, they have to be thinking about taking a step and learning about specifically what you want to do. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. And I love the ride along idea. Once we can safely get back to doing that, I mean, that's a great way to really see if this was something you'd like to pursue. And that's what it's all about, is getting that hands-on experience. Thank you for that. We have some good questions. I want to just step back for a second so we can kind of set the framework here. Lieutenant Myers, can you just tell us sort of a day in the life a little bit? Like, paint a picture for us. I know you've worn a lot of hats. Pick one hat, and take us through, what does a shift look like? What does it feel like? Help the students understand what the work is.
Sure. So I'm going to go back in time to when I was a young police officer. So I wasn't a supervisor. I probably wasn't even on SWAT. And I would come into work and I would meet up with my squad, and we would sit down in the briefing room, and our sergeant would go over all of the information that was relevant from the last couple of days. So we would find out about what neighborhoods might have had some burglaries or vehicle break-ins. Maybe we learn about a resident that is having mental issues, and we've been out to their house several times, and we need to be aware that when we're going out there, we've been out there before. We might find out that certain roads are under construction. So if we have to drive Code 3, we may want to avoid those roads. So we're getting an overview of what the shift is going to potentially be like. And then you go out and you gas your car up and you make sure all your equipment's ready for the shift, and you get your coffee, and you put yourself in service. Once you're in service, code 3 is lights and sirens. So code 1 is just normal routine driving. Code 2 is where you're using your lights but not your sirens because you want to sneak up on the bad guys. And code 3 is lights and sirens, and you're driving very aggressively, and you really have a sense of urgency. So after you put yourself in service, you start answering calls. You might get dispatched to domestics, or you might get dispatched to a lost dog, a runaway, a depressed person. All of these types of calls, you don't know what you're going to get. So if you're a person that likes variety and likes dealing with people, law enforcement might be a good option for you. If you like sitting behind a desk and behind a computer, and you feel comfortable in a more static environment, maybe something like dispatch would be a better career choice for you. So again, you kind of have to figure out your personality, because it sounds great running around going call to call and seeing all these people and hunting bad guys. But the reality is some of these people are dangerous. And you have to also have the sort of the ability to transition to being a more aggressive person. So you have to be able to go up and down. And it's not for everybody. Some people really don't like it. And I think the other thing I would comment on is police officers see really, really horrible things. Maybe not every day, some departments maybe, but having to go to work and seeing people at their worst, or seeing somebody that was just in a car crash and they're very, very injured, or maybe they've lost a family member, that's relatively routine for us. And if you're a person that gets too stressed out, or you don't enjoy kind of being all over the spectrum of people's feelings and emotions, then I would stay away from being a police officer. But if that's something you can deal with, then I think maybe this is the right career for you.
Thank you. Really good stuff right there. I appreciate you taking us through what a day feels like. And we have some really good questions here in the chat. Another good one that just came from, I can't see actually the name. Let's see if I can grab the name. Yeah, it was Teresa White. Okay. And it was something that you and I talked about prior, which is how, in the wake of everything going on in the news, we know what's going on in the news today. There's a big trial and a big decision, and there's been just a lot of anxiety around policing and impacting all communities. How has Coral Springs adjusted over the last 18 to 24 months in sort of a new environment? And how have you changed? How has the department changed? What can students expect as they enter this field? Are we in a bit of a different climate now?
So law enforcement is a very fluid profession. I think there are some careers that don't change much. If you're an accountant, the rules of accounting, I think, are pretty similar from the day you get in to the day you leave. Maybe there's minor changes. I don't know. I'm not an accountant. But for law enforcement, the rules change all the time. Laws are constantly being changed. Society and legal cases are constantly being updated, and the way we do our job changes. So I don't know how many of you guys are history students, but if you look back at law enforcement from when it started in the 1800s, it was you wouldn't even be able to recognize what it is to what it is today. And if you just go back to law enforcement in the 1950s, which for you guys seems probably like an eternity, but for me, that was my parents. So your grandparents, they're police officers, were doing law enforcement completely different than they were doing it now. And to talk about 18 months is such a small period of time, but it's been a dramatic change in sort of the feeling of the country. Mm-hmm. So as far as changes go, we're always changing. When I started 25 years ago, we could get into car chases for almost anything. Today, we have very, very strict policies on when we can get into a car chase. It has to be a very violent type crime. So we're not allowed to chase for minor things. And that's not because police officers don't want to chase people. Trust me. If it were up to me, we'd be chasing everybody and we'd be smashing cars and it'd be great. But we can't because there's too much liability. We don't want people getting injured if the bad guy drives poorly and crashes into somebody, or if, God forbid, the police officer crashes into somebody and hurts somebody. So we have to have rules that guide how we do our job. And those rules are constantly changing. So one example is police chases and pursuits. I would say that a major shift in law enforcement was body cameras. And that came about a couple years ago, again, from a controversial police-involved incident. And I don't think we have enough time to go over each incident and talk about, who was right and who was wrong. But what I would say is we're constantly adapting. I couldn't even imagine 5 or 10 years ago doing my job with a body camera on. But now I can't imagine doing it without a body camera on.
Wow.
The body cameras, I don't know what the percentage of times is. It's probably 98 out of 100 show that the officer was doing a good job, and only maybe 1 or 2% of the time that the officer wasn't doing a good job. And it might be much, much higher than that. It might be 9,990 out of 1,000. The problem is 1 or 2 bad incidents make it look bad for everybody. And I would say to everybody that I'm talking to, the vast majority of police officers are good people, but they're people. And I'm a good person. I've never fired my gun, but I've been training to do that for 25 years. But I may have to someday. It isn't something that we get into this job wanting to go out and shoot people. In fact, only a handful of Coral Springs police officers and only a very few number of police officers around the country have ever used their gun. So the problem is 1 or 2 people do a bad job and it makes it feel like the whole profession is bad. And I feel like we've sort of lost the trust of society because of a few bad examples. And that I don't want to make it sound like all police officers are great. They're not. There are some police officers that are not great. However, the vast majority are good people trying to do a good job. And I think if you take anything away from this, you have to realize that nobody's perfect. We're doing a very hard job, very difficult job under a lot of stress. And you have to trust me. When I say we're under a lot of stress, it's sometimes life and death. Just the car ride to the incident. And so when you're doing stressful things, sometimes bad things happen. And it isn't necessarily because of race or religion or sex. I would like to point out that my platoon, which is about 30 people, we have people of every race. We have people of every religion. We have people of different, they identify sexually differently. So we have gay people, we have straight people. And my platoon works great together. And none of us would put up with somebody that was being racist or being a bully or a thief or any other bad thing that we couldn't put up with. So I just hope that the pendulum swings back a little bit and society realizes that the police aren't the bad guys.
Thank you.
And we'll see how that goes.
No, I appreciate that explanation. It's important to have that honest conversation right now. Thank you for all of those thoughts. We have some really good questions here back on like sort of the student side, sort of on the outside looking in. A lot of questions. I want to pull some names in, like Nina Post, Chris Alvarado. I've seen some questions from you about, do you have to go to college to be a police officer? Do you need only certain credits to be a police officer? Help us through that. Who is eligible?
Yeah. So each police department is a little bit different. Some police departments require a 4-year degree. I would say that's probably the small percentage. Most require like an AA, so I guess a 2-year degree. That would be most. Some only require a high school graduation, like a GED or something. But I would say to be competitive and in order to get hired at most departments around the country, you probably need a couple years of college.
Okay.
I would say that sums it up. Now, if you want to go FBI, I saw a lot of people saying they wanted to go federal. they require a master's degree almost universally, unless you have a really unique skill set.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. And another question, oh, I just lost the name, but a question, see if I can dig up the person's name again. It was, well, can't find it, but if you ask this question, tell us in the chat about like sort of the salary and benefits and sort of the, what does that package look like when you're a police officer? Do you have to stay a certain number of years to receive certain benefits? Help the students understand that.
Yeah, so it's very different based on where you are in the country. So there's some police departments that I would say police officers are probably starting out making $25,000 or $30,000 a year. At my department, the starting salary is about $60,000 a year.
Wow.
And a patrolman after about 10 years should be making close to $95,000. And then on top of that, most departments have a pension. And to me, that is sort of the treasure at the end of the journey, because what that means is when I retire, I'll be getting a monthly paycheck that represents anywhere from 50 to 80% of your salary. So if you were making 100,000, you're going to be getting in your pension somewhere between $50,000 and $80,000. And I know those numbers are kind of broad, but it really does depend on the agency, the state, where in the state. So if you're in New York, near Manhattan, you're going to be getting paid a lot more than if you're in upper state New York in a rural area. So you kind of have to figure out where you want to apply. And for the federal government, I would say most federal agents start around 70, 80,000 and work their way up to about 150,000.
Wow. Wow. Students, I want to make sure we're all hearing this, and numbers are so important in our own story. And as we listen, he said in his department, the starting salary is often what number? Can someone tell me in the chat what number we heard from his department, Coral Springs? 60K. Thank you. Make sure we're listening. And remember, when we're talking about ourselves and our own experiences, we need to attach numbers to our experiences too. If we raised money, we say how much money, the exact dollar amount. If we put on an event, we say how many people came. The numbers matter. Numbers stand out to us. So I appreciate you listening for all of that. I think it's important students understand really at a young age what a pension is. You know, these are real life things that you have to start considering even as early as leaving high school. There was another good question from Elise about, and we've talked a little bit about COVID, but how has COVID impacted your day-to-day? How has it changed your routine? The things you used to just always do without even thinking about it, now it's not so easy. How has COVID changed your day after day on the job?
Well, it's been amazingly different. I can't believe how different it is. All of our meetings are in Zoom. So we used to have the supervisor meeting where all of us would get together in a room. Now we do it from computers. But for the patrolmen, they have to wear masks. They respond to different calls differently. So if you're dealing with a sick person, we used to just put on gloves and go deal with them. Now we wear masks and glasses and goggles, and a lot of times we won't even go anymore. We'll just send the paramedics, where we used to go first, and then the paramedics would follow us behind.
Wow.
So it has shifted around the country. But there was a long time where police officers didn't wear gloves. In the 80s and the 90s, and they didn't realize that blood was dangerous or could be dangerous. So then they started wearing gloves. So it's an evolution. I wear a bulletproof vest. Police officers didn't always wear bulletproof vests. So again, our protective gear is constantly changing.
It's like once you have it, you can't imagine going on without it, right? It's like a seatbelt. Like how did we ever get by without seatbelt? But that was just the way of the world. And now it's, you have to wear goggles and masks, and that's just going to be probably for a long time, what it is. And
I see. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I
Please.
see a lot of questions about like what could high school and junior high school kids do to get ready for law enforcement. And I just thought that those questions, I keep seeing them, and I wanted to just touch on them real quick. I think the first thing that you guys have to do is stay out of trouble. And I know it sounds simple, but if you make a bad choice or a bad decision, law enforcement is not forgiving. We don't want to hire bad apples, and you could clearly understand why in today's environment. But if you are, if you're doing drugs, if you do a DUI, if you steal something, those, those decisions that you make today could come back and haunt you in the future. So I would say, be careful about the decisions that you make and who you hang out with. I'm not saying don't have fun. I'm not saying don't party. I understand I've got an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old. However, police are held to a higher standard, and we are not going to hire somebody that has made bad choices. So make good choices. Then after that, a lot of the high schools and the junior high schools have like a law enforcement program. They have school resource officers, and they can do different events with the police department. They can get training. I think they're called police explorers. That's what we call them at our department. And they get a huge benefit of getting to see behind the scenes how law enforcement works. And I would say definitely try and do that. And if they don't have that, they might have like a junior ROTC, ROTC. Although that's more geared to military, law enforcement is paramilitary. And I think having some of that in your background would help maybe equally just as much. So if you don't have the Police Explorer program, but you have the ROTC program, I would say get involved in that, or get involved with both if you can. I would say stay in shape or get in shape. This is not a profession where being out of shape is a good idea. And I think you're going to have a hard time getting hired if you're not in shape. I would even suggest, maybe doing martial arts or boxing, not professionally, but get a feel for what it's like to get punched in the face in a safe, controlled environment. Because as a police officer, that's something that might happen. And if you get punched in the face and you go, oh, this is not for me, you've just wasted 6 months at the police academy. You've just wasted the thousands of dollars of training, and the time you could have been working on something else. So those are the things I would say, if you wanted to get ready for being a police officer, some of the things to think about.
Thank you. And a lot of really good advice. For those of you who have our worksheet, and maybe Mac, if you want to provide the worksheet one more time in the chat, a lot of good advice being shared here. Excellent stuff. I mean, make sure you're okay getting punched in the face. I think that could be the,
Right. Stay away from donuts. Who said that?
That one.
Who said stay away from donuts? I like
right.
that.
Stay away from serving donuts. Thank you very much. I want to take a quick pause on the Q&A. I want to do a quick writing exercise with students. Those of you who are new, okay, we stress through our company, we're all about communication skills. And this is directly applicable to applying for a job in law enforcement. Lieutenant Myers would want to see you do what we're about to do correctly. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to pull up an email. What do the students notice? Teachers too. What do you notice about this email? What's going on with some of these words? What do you spot with the word I in particular? What's going on there? Lowercase, Skylar says. What I would like all the students to do who are by their chat is I want you to write this, the part I've highlighted, write this sentence with a period in the chat with proper capitalization. Can you do that for me? Can you show me how, if you're writing a message to Lieutenant Myers, so he would consider you for a job, how would you write that sentence, please? Caitlin says, I'm writing to see if I can visit your company. Let's put a period on it. Okay, we're just going to end the sentence right there. Thank you, Josh. No comma after C, just one long sentence. I'm writing to see if I can visit your company. Great job. Great job. Now, company is not capitalized. Okay, it's just the word company. It's not Coral Springs Police Department, which would be capitalized. Okay, Lieutenant Myers, when you're receiving emails from potential applicants, would you prefer to see complete sentences or lowercase letters and no punctuation?
If it wasn't properly typed out and spelled out, I would be very disappointed.
Wow. There you go. So it doesn't matter what career field you're going into. When you are communicating for opportunities, or when you're in the job and you're writing to a customer, right? We have to write professionally because it reflects on us and on our company, right? So it seems like little things that we're talking about here, but they actually hold a lot of significance, because all you really need is for Lieutenant Myers to want to write you back, right? To entertain a conversation which could lead to a job. But if he doesn't want to write you back at all, what happens? Nothing happens. It ends right there. So as we wrap up just the last few minutes, I want to remind the teachers who missed it the first time, and we'll wrap up with Lieutenant Myers in just a second. Those of you who missed it, we put together a Google folder of free resources, exercises, and presentations for learning to write professionally. The worksheet I just showed you is included: capitalizing I, text messages, cursive signatures, lots of good stuff ready-made, and also a presentation checklist, how to give an effective online presentation, which I'm sure any students have some presentations coming up in May to finish out the year. Any virtual presentations, let us know in the chat. All right. And for the teachers who are interested, who missed this at the beginning, all you have to do, put interested in the chat with your email address, interested and your email address, and we will pass along the material. What we like to do is have a brief 5-minute conversation over the phone in the next day or so to meet you, learn about your program, help you bring this content into your classroom to make the most of the rest of this year or the summer or the fall. Okay, so if you missed it, please request it, and we'll be sure to pass it along as soon as possible. Don't forget about our webinar on May 5th, The World of Real Estate. Please join us then, 1:30 p.m. Eastern, about learning about the world of real estate. We'd love to have you there as well. Let me turn off the share, and we'll come back to Lieutenant Myers. We try to finish at 2:15 Eastern every time, so we keep everybody on their schedule, and I'm sure you're very busy too. Let's give us some final thoughts. We have a lot of students here who are clearly very interested in this field, and you've helped them understand what it will take. Give them your parting wisdom about going into this field, going back 25 years, and what you would say to yourself.
First of all, I'm one of the few people that I know that actually loves going to work. When I'm not working, I think about working. And all of my other adult friends are typically miserable with their job. And Danny, I hope you like your job. But I think most people are not doing what they really love to do. And I really love to do this. So if you can find something that you love to do, the money doesn't matter. Everything will kind of work itself out. So I would say, try and find what you love. And if you do, you're going to be good and you're going to be successful. You might have to jump through a lot of hoops. Becoming a police officer is very tough. A lot of that is just because they want to see if you are tough enough and resilient enough to get through all the hurdles and the hoops. But it's worth it. If this is what you want to do, it's an amazing profession. I get to help a lot of people. I've saved lives. I've been there for people, and most people can't say that. So I can go to bed at night proud, and I think when I retire in a few years, I'll have great stories to tell my grandkids, and I can be proud of what I've done. So
thank you.
You can't ask for more than that.
Students, teachers, can we see a show of hands in Zoom thanking Lieutenant Myers for his time today and his advice? If those of you who have the worksheet, the last question was, if you were to write a thank you note, which maybe we'll talk about thank you note writing next time around, composition of thank you notes, what is some advice that you would tell him that he told you, something that you really valued that he told you? That's a great thing to put into a thank you note, is something that they share with you that stuck with you. And what he just said, do something that you love. The money and everything will work itself out. Don't worry about that. Do what you enjoy. And for him, it's policing, it's law enforcement. And I know for some of you, it could be the same thing. So I want to thank you very much, Lieutenant Myers, for your time. I want to thank Ms. Rhonda Cunningham for her time providing the sign language services. And I want to thank all of you for being here. We've had such wonderful conversations over the spring with different people from different occupations, and this was another great one. So my thanks to all of you, and I hope you'll join us in 2 weeks for the real estate conversation. Until then, I hope you stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you on May 5th. Thank you, everybody.